I was just speaking at the Assembly of First Nations. I was also spent my family vacation in Haida Gwaii, and then was most recently in the Northwest Territories, which I know that's where you were born, and you have a special attachment to the Northwest Territories. And while we're seeing the impacts of climate change across the country with extreme weather events, Prince Edward Island is actually receding by 43 centimeters a year. Nowhere are we seeing the impacts of climate change more than in the north. It is very worrying. I was talking to Indigenous leaders there, Northerners, and they were talking about ice roads melting. So that means that communities are unable to reach each other. It's harder to get goods there. We're seeing hunting and fishing being much harder. That you are seeing the country food that people are relying on is no longer there. You're seeing an increase of species at risk. You're seeing invasive species. And it's not just an inconvenience, folks. It's a change in the way in life that we're seeing. And so it is really important that when we talk about climate change, we recognize that it really is the challenge of our generation, and we only have this generation to tackle this challenge. But I'm not here to talk about the moral challenge. We're here to talk about you and the financial sector and both the risks and also the opportunities when it comes to climate change. When we talk about the risks, we've seen extreme weather events. Now, while it's very difficult to attribute a particular event to climate change, when you look at the forest fires in Fort McMurray, $3.65 billion, or over $3 billion is what we're now saying the cost was. And when the Insurance Bureau of Canada is saying we're only going to see more extreme weather events as we go forward. But there's also a huge opportunity, and we'll talk about that as well. When we were in Paris at the climate talks, one of the untold stories was Mission Innovation, where you had billionaire philanthropists like Bill Gates who are talking about the need for huge investments in renewables and clean tech sector so that we could meet the challenges of climate change. But billionaires like Bill Gates don't just do these things for fun. There's absolutely huge economic opportunity, and we want to see Canada be part of that opportunity. So what have we been doing? I'll use this little opportunity before we get into our conversation to show that we are serious about climate change. Because I think government signals are important. We'll talk about market signals. But you have a government that is absolutely committed to acting on climate change and showing that the environment and the economy do go together. So Paris climate talks, we worked very hard to get an ambitious agreement. We were there not just with premiers. We were there with members of the opposition. We were there with business. We were there with Indigenous leaders. We were there with environmentalists. We were there with youth. And I think that's really important because everyone has to be in this together. Some people are leading. Some of you in the room are leading. Some of you might be in the laggards category. But I'm going to drag all of you along because we are serious about tackling climate change. After Paris, there was the meeting between the Prime Minister and the First Ministers where they agreed that we needed to have a plan to meet our target. So our target, and I don't think Canadians care as much about targets as they do about action, but I think our target is important because we agreed, the previous government agreed that we would reduce emissions by 30% over 2005 levels by 2030. You don't need to know that. All you need to know is currently this is the direction our emissions are going, and this is the directions our emissions need to be going. So we got a lot of work to do. We've already started. We've made in our budget, we made I think it's really the greenest budget ever, making significant investments in green infrastructure, but also public transit. Even social infrastructure is going to be energy efficient, climate resilient investments, investments in innovation in the clean tech sector, but also in the natural resource sector so that we can reduce emissions from that sector as well. Across our budget, you will see that we are very serious about how we're going to transition to a more sustainable future. We had the meeting with President Obama. The big outcome from that meeting was our agreement on climate and clean energy. Part of that, reducing emissions from the oil and gas sector by 45%, 40 to 45%, which is actually like taking all the cars off the road in Ontario and Quebec. We then extended that agreement to Mexico most recently. And now we're engaged in our what we're calling the Pan-Canadian Climate Change Plan, which is really cumbersome. Basically, it's how are we moving forward on this? What's the plan? Certainly carbon pricing is going to be part of that plan. We've talked about a national price on carbon, and I'm very excited that later today, I think we are up to 22 companies that have signed on to our carbon pricing leadership initiative, joining companies and governments around the world calling for a price on carbon. I think that's extraordinarily important. But we have working groups that are looking at technical areas like how do you reduce emissions from the oil and gas sector, from buildings, from vehicles, from agriculture, forestry, where we know are the major buckets emissions are coming from. We're also looking at adaptation. That's going to be key. We need to make sure we have climate resilient infrastructure. We need to be addressing the changes we're already seeing in communities across the country. And then equally important is the working group that's on clean tech jobs and innovation, because that's piece of this. That this is really a huge economic opportunity, but we really need to be thoughtful about how we move forward and make sure it is an opportunity and that everyone's benefiting, even though there may be a transition for some. And I should say, just because I know, just so you don't think that I'm alone, because people like environment ministers, but you guys probably like finance ministers more. I work extremely closely with Bill Morneau. He and I are leading the working group, ultimately leading from the federal side the working group on carbon pricing. And I think that's really important. That should provide you with some confidence, but it should show that we're all in on this.